right, we're talking Chip Kelly. And Chip Kelly at Ohio State's spring ball, we played the audio of him identifying kind of where he came to this decision that he wanted to be a position coach and a coordinator again. It's what he was great at, whether it was when he was at New Hampshire or when he came to the University of Oregon, and his development in squeezing really the best that he could out of quarterbacks, especially when he was at Oregon. Going to a national championship game with Darren Thomas as your quarterback, pretty successful. And they kind of were breaking the mold of the breakneck pace, and it was a style that people weren't accustomed to. But Chip has always been a great position coach and play caller. And he wanted to get back to those roots because when Gunderson left for Oregon State, he was like, I got to coach quarterbacks, and he loved it. Mm-hmm. He also added this to his presser yesterday. And I think that this goes to the larger point of you have the football guys and the CEOs of college football. And this is the decision you have to make.
John Lennon, when he was a little kid, that had an assignment of what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be happy. And then his teacher said, I don't think you understand the assignment. And his mom said, I don't think you understand life. So I just want to be happy. And I'm really happy coaching a position. Really happy to be at this place. You know, it would have taken a special place for me to leave UCLA because I love those players and I love that coaching staff. But to be here with Ryan, I had a great relationship. I've known Ryan since he was a little kid. So I think a lot of things just fell into place that way.
When I heard that, I thought of this morning when I was reading the reasoning why Nick Saban left the Alabama football program and why he decided this was the time for him to leave. It was one of those situations where Saban, I guess, after last year, went to Greg Byrne, the AD at Alabama, and he said, the time is coming. The time is coming where I'm going to be stepping away. And he said that it came to a head this year after what happened after losing the Rose Bowl to Michigan in the semifinal of the CFP. He said that he wasn't just upset at the loss itself, but the way that his team handled the loss. Mm-hmm. He said that there was a lot of pouting, a lot of like throwing of helmets, things that he said is not the way that the messaging over his 17 years at Alabama had been consistent with.
Yes.
Which was, we do things a certain way, we do things the right way. It's about development. It's about, I guess, tracking towards graduation, even if you're not graduating.
Sure.
Tracking towards graduation in academics and becoming a player that is ready for the NFL as well. But all of those things, he said that his messaging was starting to fall flat and on deaf ears because when he was bringing guys in for the exit interviews at the end of the season, he was hearing a lot of how much playing time am I going to get? How much money am I going to get in NIL? And those were the main focuses of a majority of the players that he was bringing in.
It was not about how do I get better? What do I need to do to get on the field? Look, this is going to sound old fuddy-duddy. And of course, Nick Saban, 72 years old, is going to kind of ring that bell, so to speak. But he's also not wrong. There is a transition, and we are always going to push forward with stuff. But when we do, no matter what it is, whether it's college football, life, there's always going to be changes. But you need to have a lens, an eye towards the future and the past. You know, the old adage of those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. And you are seeing that there is again, it sounds so ridiculous, but there is a selfish player that is taking over sports, not just college sports.
It's the professionalization of sports.
But even at the highest levels, it is the team concept is dying. It is an individualization. It is a me. The reason the team guys stand out more so now, the reason the Mike Conleys of the world are so sought after now is because it's becoming increasingly rare.
And to that point, I see, yes, there is a me aspect of it.
But is not an inherently bad thing.
I also say that I think the great teams across, especially football in general, that is pushed aside. That was not the case at Washington. It was not the case at Michigan. It was not the case at Oregon this year either. I think if you're looking at the programs that are succeeding, it is, I think it's less about that idea, and that mentality has always been there. The idea, and we were talking about this yesterday, right? The fact that the professionalization of sports with Dartmouth's, athletics,
The
unionizing, and it's like the flares are being shot into the air of, hey, here come pro sport. They're going to be considered employees. I think what is changing for guys like Nick Saban, that mentality and that thinking has always been there. It is just players can now be forthright and open with their coaches, because what he said was, players were saying, what assurances do I have that I'm going to be playing next year? How much money am I going to get in NIL? Those are all discussions that never happened up front with a coach, but now there is a little bit of leverage for players that say, hey, I do know my value, and I can have these conversations with my head coach now. And he said it to ESPN. He said, and I think that it's pretty interesting when you look at Nick Saban of all people. He said it's not wrong. I'm just saying that's never been what we're about. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just not what we've been about.
I'm with him until that last line, because
it's not why we had success through the years. And I agree with him on that. And that's why I think we're seeing this change and this shift happening, is that I think what we're having with a guy like Nick Saban is he's sitting there going, my message that has been consistent over the course of my career, which has been wildly successful, especially the 17 seasons at Alabama, has been consistent and the same. But the times have changed so much with the transfer portal and NIL. And when he says it's not bad, it's not wrong, it's just different. I think that's where you're going to see why you're seeing Jim Harbaugh jump from college to the NFL, why Chip Kelly leaves and goes in as a coordinator now, why Nick Saban is stepping away and into retirement. It's because of the fact that these guys that have been wildly successful, they've got to reinvent themselves in totality to make sure that they can survive. And that's why guys like Kirby Smart are so successful, is because they weren't ingrained in that non-portal, non-NIL era. Kirby Smart got in as a head coach before that era really took hold and took off, but everybody saw the writing on the wall. And so what we're seeing with the newer head coaches or the younger head coaches is this idea that we have got to approach, and our messaging just has to be different. Not to say that you can't create that team atmosphere like Kalen DeBoer did up at Washington while still having NIL and still having the transfer portal and not having those guys leave. The team aspect is still there. You just have to navigate it completely differently. And when some of the greatest coaches of all times have to step away because they can't survive in that atmosphere, we see it in the business world all the time. Right?
It's exactly the same thing, and that's what I was saying. I'm not saying this is a bad thing.
Yeah,
the inherent quote unquote selfishness. That's why I kind of rolled my eyes, because it's not. It's always been there, but there is it is becoming more insulated selfishness.
Yeah, and what you're saying is you kind of laugh at that. It's never been what they've been all about.
But all that they've ever been about,
the paying of players, he's never had to deal with it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's never had to deal with that, and now he does. And for Saban, it was, I've had my run. It's been an incredible run. I'm 72. I got nothing else to prove. I'm out. For Chip Kelly, it was, I still have so much football left in me. How can I be just as happy? And oh, by the way, when your coordinators can now make $1.5 million or $2 million, makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a nice little way to make things work.
Easier, less pressure, less BS to deal with. It's really fascinating to kind of see how quickly the world is changing. And when you have guys like Dan Lanning, and when you have your Kirby Smarts, Ryan Day too, in this regard, as a head coach, your job is, and this is going to be an interesting one with Lincoln Riley, who's a play caller. And there's so much more that he has to deal with.
And he does not like to deal with the BS at USC. He is both on and off record. He does not deal with like the alumni. Well, he's starting to deal with the alumni meetings and the booster stuff. And that's, I have one eyebrow raised to that, because as a play caller at the school, they love him. As a coach there, they love him. But before the stuff started to really shift, he was already like, I don't know.
That is going to be how he navigates this because it's not optional anymore.
No.
It's mandatory that you are the CEO of the business that is your football program.
Because it's $1 billion entity.
And the thing that you hear repeatedly about Lanning and at practices, what he does is he bounces around. Dude has a microphone with him. And so as they're pumping in the music and all that stuff, he can have a microphone. And if he sees something on one side of the field, he's not with any particular position group. He just bounces. And he is all over the field. And if he sees something, boom, he can get the attention. He goes over. You're coaching as you're overseeing everything. If there's something that just isn't right,
it's oversight as opposed to micromanaging.
That's where you're at, and you're kind of just stepping in and being like, hey, we know what this is. And you heard Chip Kelly say bouncing around meetings. That was part of his first clip on why it wasn't that he got to ever stay ingrained in one thing.
No.
He had to bounce from one position group to the other, both sides of the football, then getting pulled out and doing those administrative things that no football guy wants to do.
Got to go do the meet and greet with the donor and take all the pictures and grin and bear it. That's the thing. Is like, I genuinely believe that in some schools are already doing this. There needs to be a general manager that deals with that.
There absolutely are, but when you're talking about boosters, when you're talking about
they want to talk to coach.
You want to talk to coach because it only gets you so far. And that I think every school, they do have a GM. They just name him a different. He has a different title, whether it's chief of operations or I'd rather be a chief than a general. I'd rather be a chief of something.
No, CEO. That's C-suite. It's different.
Yeah, but you have all of these guys, and this is where you go, how does the football guy survive as a head coach? And it's got to be it's a different wiring and a different framing of what a head coach does now. Because a head coach for when Nick Saban was coming up, that's a different planet than a head coach for young coaches now. Whether you're Dan Lanning or Trent Bray or Jake Dickert, it is a different world that you're living in. And so you have to rewire what that process is, because I think the play caller is dying, and the guy who, and it's going to start with young coaches coming up, being used to that being your normal.
I also think that that's going to be a prohibitive in a sense, where that the thing that organizations, schools, whatever you want to call them, going forward are going to look for are the football guy. The rarity is the football guy, because you get these guys all of a sudden that are more businessmen than football coaches, because you hear that in the business world, where you get people that they, you see either hostile takeovers or a reshaping of a business plan. I worked for a company that got bought out by a company that was a venture capitalist firm, and the entire vision of the company changed.
Widget makers.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, that inherent knowledge, that corporate knowledge fades away. And that's the thing that becomes the most valuable thing of a franchise, of an industry. And so I think that might end up being the most valuable quote unquote commodity, is the football guy, both on the coaching side and on the player side. The player that just wants to shut up and do football, the coach that just wants to shut up and do football. Those are going to be the things that are the rare commodities, I think, in college sports going forward.
It's a different dynamic. And that's the thing about it, though. In order to become that, you're not going to have some guy just coming off the streets with no football coaching experience.
No.
It's going to be the guy who, the thing about being a college coach especially, is you've got to work from the analyst or the GA to the analyst to the position coach to a coordinator, and then work your way up, but always having in the back of your mind that when I get to where I want to be, everything that I have done is just going to be pushed aside towards everything is management moving forward.
Yeah. So you build towards that, so you have the foundation of knowing what it is, and then you don't use it.
Ultimately, I honestly believe, I think it's going to be good for college football, because how petrified are universities that my young hot coordinator is just going to be plucked away to be a head coach?
Yeah.
I think that we're going to start seeing a lot of these young coaches are going, grass isn't always greener. Grass is not
that
always
realization.
greener. Staying as a coordinator, if I love football and I just love coaching, that's what I want to do.
There's going to be money in it.
There's going to be a lot of money in it.
So